What is the price of a single mistake? Not a small one. Not forgetting a birthday or saying the wrong thing. I'm talking about a mistake so vast, so profound, that its shadow stretches across centuries. A mistake that becomes your only legacy. For all of humanity, that price was everything. We thought the universe would be full of wonder. We dreamed of first contact as this beautiful, shining moment where we'd step onto the galactic stage and finally find out we weren't alone. We poured our hope into those dreams. We built telescopes that listened for a whisper, any whisper, in the crushing silence of space. And then we found it. Or rather, it found us. But it wasn't a welcome. It was a verdict. The first signal wasn't a message of peace or a complex mathematical equation. It was a single repeating data packet broadcast from a relay probe just outside Pluto's orbit. A probe we didn't put there. It was cold, alien, and utterly without feeling. It contained one thing, a star chart. Our solar system was highlighted in a soft, golden light. And surrounding it, in every direction, stretching out into the infinite black, was a solid, impenetrable wall of red. A quarantine zone. A keep-out sign written in starlight and aimed directly at us. That was our introduction to the galactic community. Not a hello, but a door slammed in our face. The silence that followed was worse than the silence before. Now we knew for sure someone was out there. And they wanted nothing to do with us. Generations lived and died under that red wall. We called it the Great Silence. Our scientists theorized, our leaders pleaded into the void, our artists created heartbreaking works about the loneliness of a species grounded by a universe that hated it. We were the pariahs. The untouchables. The ones who had done something. But what? What could an entire species do before it even knew there were neighbors to offend? That's where our story begins. With a man staring at a ghost. His name isn't important. He was just an archivist. One of the thousands who sifted through old data, trying to find a clue, any clue, in our own history that could explain the judgment hanging over our heads. He was looking at the raw data from the early deep space probes. Voyager 1 and 2. Ancient history. He'd seen the data a million times. The grainy photos of Jupiter and Saturn. The audio recordings of interstellar plasma. But that day he saw something else. A blip. A tiny anomaly in the background radiation readings from Voyager 2, taken just after it passed Neptune. A spike of energy so faint, so brief, that every algorithm had dismissed it as cosmic noise for over 100 years. But he saw it. And he couldn't unsee it. He cross-referenced it. He ran new models. And a cold dread began to pool in his stomach. The spike wasn't natural. It had a signature. It was structured. And it came from a point in space that, according to our oldest star maps, was empty. Nothing there but a few rogue asteroids and a whole lot of nothing. He took his finding to his superior, his hands shaking. They dismissed him. A sensor ghost, they said. Wishful thinking. But he couldn't let it go. This was the first strange thing anyone had found in a century. He worked in secret. He used unauthorized processing time on the deep range arrays, the ones we used to just stare longingly at the stars we could never visit. And he found it. Not a sensor ghost. Not noise. Ruin. Out there, in the dark, right where that energy spike originated, was a debris field. Not from a natural disaster. The patterns were all wrong. The energy readings, even after all this time, whispered of a violent, sudden end. This was a graveyard. And it was old. Incredibly old. Dating back to right around the time our first radio waves would have reached that sector of space. His heart was hammering against his ribs. This was it. The answer. The reason for the silence. We hadn't been shunned for what we might do. We had been shunned for what we had already done. A team was assembled in absolute secrecy. The best pilot we had, a woman with ice in her veins and a lifetime of flying simulators for journeys she never thought she'd take. A xenolinguist who had spent her life studying languages that didn't exist, trying to decode the silence itself. And the archivist. The man who found the ghost. They were given a ship. Not a warship. We didn't have those. A fast, quiet scout vessel. Its mission was simple: go there. Find out what happened. And finally learn the truth of our original sin. The journey took months. The tension on that ship was a living thing. Every moment they expected a fleet of alien ships to drop out of warp and blast them into atoms for breaking the quarantine. But nothing happened. The silence was their only companion. They finally reached the coordinates. The screen filled with the image of the debris field. It was immense. This wasn't a small outpost. This was the remains of a world. A civilization. Shattered into a billion pieces. They drifted through the silent, frozen wreckage. The linguist tried to find patterns, anything that could be writing or art. But it was all so destroyed. Then the archivist picked up a faint, repeating power signature coming from a larger chunk of wreckage. A piece of a structure, maybe? A surviving fragment. The pilot maneuvered the ship closer. It was a building or part of one. Torn in half, frozen solid. They suited up. They had to go out there. They had to see. The airlock hissed open and they stepped into the void. Floating towards that broken piece of history. Inside the place was a tomb. Everything was still, preserved in the perfect cold of space. They found figures. The former inhabitants. Frozen where they fell. And the look on their faces, even through their alien features, the emotion was horrifyingly clear. It wasn't fear of an attack. It was agony. A profound, overwhelming terror. It was written in the way their bodies were contorted, a final, silent scream into the void. In the center of the main chamber they found it. A central console. Somehow it still had a flicker of power. A last testament running on emergency backup for 100 years. The linguist got to work. Her hands trembled as she interfaced her tablet, using every decoding algorithm she'd ever built. Characters flashed across her screen. Alien script began to resolve, to translate. The archivist watched over her shoulder, his breath fogging his helmet visor. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms from the ship. "What are you seeing?" "Report." The linguist didn't answer. She just stared at her screen, her blood running cold. The translation was rough, incomplete. But it was enough. She read the last logged entry. The final message of a dead species. The words appeared on her screen, one agonizing line at a time. "They are not attacking." Pause. The console flickered. "They are screaming." Another line. The archivist felt the world drop out from under him. "And their scream is killing us." The linguist finally found her voice, a choked, broken whisper that echoed in the helmets of her crewmates. "My God, what did we do?" The silence in the wake of her words was heavier than the void outside. It was a physical pressure, crushing their helmets, filling their suits. The three of them floated in that shattered chamber, surrounded by the frozen, agonized forms of the dead, and the only sound was the ragged, too-loud rhythm of their own breathing echoing in their ears. The pilot's voice finally crackled over the calm, sharp, professional. A lifeline thrown into the abyss. "Say again, linguist?" "Your signal broke up." She was clinging to procedure, to the mundane, because the alternative was unthinkable. The linguist didn't look up from her screen. Her fingers, clumsy in their thick gloves, traced the alien words. It says, "They are not attacking. They are screaming. And their scream is killing us." Her voice was flat, hollow with shock. Back on the scout ship, the pilot's hands froze over her controls. She stared at the video feed from their helmet cams, at the twisted figures. "A scream? That did this?" The archivist was the first to move. He pushed off gently from a frozen bulkhead, drifting closer to the console. "A psychic event?" he murmured, more to himself than the others. "We've theorized about telepathic species. But we don't have that. We can't scream like that." "Maybe we did," the linguist whispered. "Once. A long time ago. And we didn't know how to control it. A broadcast of pure raw emotion." She looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific understanding behind her visor. "The first radio waves we ever sent out, they weren't just music and greetings. What if they carried something else? Something we didn't know we were sending?" The idea hung in the air, monstrous and absurd. The pilot found her voice again. "That's impossible. We've analyzed those broadcasts for a century. There's nothing there but electromagnetic radiation." "Nothing we can detect," the archivist countered, a spark of his old obsession igniting. "What if our instruments were only built to measure what we understand? What if this," he gestured around the tomb, "was caused by a dimension of physics we're blind to? A frequency of existence we didn't know existed?" The linguist's tablet beeped softly. She looked down. The console, it's not just a log. It's a library. A fragmented one, but there's more. It's trying to recontextualize the data. It needs a stronger connection. She looked towards the archivist. "I need to hardline in. There's a port here. A risk. A huge one. Connecting an alien system, even a dying one, directly to their equipment. It could introduce viruses, wipe their systems, or trigger some ancient security protocol they couldn't possibly understand." The archivist didn't hesitate. He unclipped a universal interface cable from his belt. "Do it." Their mission was to find the truth. Whatever it cost. As the linguist carefully plugged the cable into the alien port in her tablet, the lights in the fragment of the structure flickered. A low, subaudible hum vibrated through the debris, felt through their boots rather than heard. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the linguist gasped. Her screen flooded with data. Not just text. Images. Sounds. Sensory impressions that the translation software struggled to parse. It was a torrent of information, a dying civilization's last memories, rushing into her machine. I'm getting everything, she breathed, her eyes darting across the screen. It's their history. Their art. Their biology. She fell silent, absorbing the flood. The others waited, the tension a wire stretched to breaking. They were called the Veln, she said finally, her voice soft with a terrible reverence. And they were beautiful. She shared the feed to their helmet displays. An image resolved before their eyes. A Veln. It was tall, willowy, with skin that seemed to be made of a subtle, shifting mother of pearl. It had large, dark eyes that held a deep, profound sadness, even in what was clearly a piece of celebratory art. They were a deeply empathic species, the linguist explained, her voice trembling as she translated the cascading data. They communicated through complex layers of telepathic emotion, paired with soft, melodic spoken words. Their entire civilization was built on harmony, on a shared emotional wavelength. Conflict was almost unheard of because they could literally feel each other's pain. Their art was about creating shared feelings of joy and wonder. Their science was a gentle, curious exploration of the universe. They were the exact opposite of loud, chaotic, divided, passionate humanity. They detected our early radio signals, the linguist continued, piecing the story together from the fragments. The simple mathematical pulses. The music we sent out on Voyager. To them it was fascinating. A new kind of song. A primitive, simplistic melody from a young, lonely species. They decided to send a greeting back. The greatest artists and thinkers of their time collaborated. They crafted what they called the first chord, a psionic broadcast of pure, welcoming joy. A wave of empathetic connection meant to cradle our entire world, to let us feel for the first time that we were not alone, that the universe was kind. She paused, swallowing hard. The archivist felt a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He knew what was coming. He knew it and he couldn't bear it. They aimed it at our source. At Earth. And they opened their hearts and they sang to us. The feed on their displays changed. It showed the Veln world as the broadcast was sent. A world holding its breath in happy anticipation. They watched the beautiful, hopeful signal race across the light years. Then the data became chaotic. Scrambled. The images turned to panic. They received our answer, the linguist said, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't an answer we ever meant to send. The Veln's psionic song didn't just interact with our technology. It resonated with us. With 7 billion human minds. It touched the heart of every man, woman, and child on the planet. And it triggered something. A feedback loop of unimaginable power. Our own raw, unfiltered human emotional noise, our fears, our angers, our passions, our loves, our deep-seated terrors, our manic joys, our billions of individual struggles and dreams, all of it, every single bit of it, was amplified by their own advanced technology and reflected back at them. It wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. And we showed them what it was to be human. To the Veln, a species that lived in gentle emotional harmony, it was an onslaught. A psychic tsunami of pure, screaming insanity. A noise that shattered their minds. Their empathic connections, their greatest strength, became their downfall. The terror spread from one to another in an instant, a chain reaction of agony that burned through their entire civilization in a matter of hours. The console's final log entry wasn't just text anymore. The linguist's software had decoded the full sensory record. It played in their helmets. They heard it. Not with their ears but in their minds. A faint, distant echo of the event. It was the sound of a world screaming. A chorus of billions of voices united in ultimate, unbearable pain. And underneath it, like a monstrous, discordant bass note, they could just make out the roaring static of humanity's own subconscious, oblivious, unchanged, and utterly lethal. The archivist ripped his helmet off, gagging, vomiting into the zero gravity of the chamber, the globules floating away like obscene tears. He was crying, sobbing. The pilot on the ship was silent, but her shoulders were shaking, her face pale as she listened to the horror through the comms. We hadn't gone to war. We hadn't built a superweapon. We hadn't even known they were there. We had just been ourselves. And that had been enough. The linguist, tears streaming down her face inside her helmet, kept working, her professional detachment utterly shattered. The quarantine, the edict, it wasn't a punishment, she choked out. It was a warning. A safety protocol. The other species, they must have found this. They saw what we did without even knowing. They heard the noise in our souls. They built the wall not to punish us but to protect the galaxy from us. We weren't monsters. We were a natural disaster. A sentient supervolcano. A biological weapon that didn't know it was armed. The archivist finally pushed himself away from the wall, wiping his mouth, his face ashen. We have to go. We have to take this back. They have to know it was an accident. The pilot's voice came back, strained but clear. A scout vessel just dropped out of warp at the edge of the system. It's not one of ours. And it's not Veln. The blood drained from their faces. They had been found. They had broken the one rule, the only rule the galaxy had for us. Stay away. Can we talk to them? The archivist asked, a desperate hope in his voice. We can explain, we have the truth now. Before the pilot could answer, a new signal washed over their ship, powerful and overriding all other channels. It was the same repeating data packet from 100 years ago. The star chart. The golden dot of our sun. The wall of impenetrable red. The same message. Unchanged. Then a second signal followed. Simple, direct, and broadcast on a frequency we used for maritime distress calls centuries ago. A frequency they clearly knew we monitored. A message made of painfully learned, translated human words. It was only 5 words. 5 words that carried the weight of 1,000 years of fear. Do not transmit. Do not move. They weren't here to talk. They were here to contain a breach. And floating in the heart of the graveyard we had created, holding the proof of our catastrophic innocence, the 3 humans realized the terrible irony. We had finally discovered our first and final crime. And in doing so, we might have just committed it all over again. The 5 words hung in the air of the scout ship's cockpit, colder and harder than the vacuum outside. Do not transmit. Do not move. On the shattered Veln station, the 3 humans were frozen, not by the command but by the sheer gut-wrenching weight of what they now knew. The archivist's vomit drifted in a sickening cloud near the ceiling, each glistening sphere reflecting the dim emergency lights of the alien tomb. The linguist had her hands pressed against the sides of her helmet, as if trying to push the echoing scream of a dead world out of her head. The pilot's voice, when it finally came over the comms, was a thin, strained wire about to snap. They're just holding position, she reported from the ship. No weapons powered. No scan. They're just watching us. They're waiting, the archivist whispered, his voice raw. He looked at the frozen Veln around them, their faces etched in a permanent agony that was his inheritance. They're waiting to see if we do it again. The horror of it was paralyzing. They were no longer explorers. They were a loaded gun pointed at the galaxy, and everyone was waiting to see if the safety was on. Every breath, every heartbeat, every frantic thought felt dangerous. What if their panic itself was a signal? What if their grief was a weapon? We have to make them understand, the linguist said, her voice trembling with a desperate hope. She gestured weakly to the console. The data, it proves it was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident. We didn't know. They don't care about intent, the archivist replied, the truth tasting like ash. They only care about effect. And our effect is annihilation. He looked around at the consequences. How do you explain a tsunami to a village it washed away? You can't. You can only warn them to run from the shore. The pilot's voice cut in sharp with a new fear. The alien ship, it's deploying something. Small. The size of a probe. It's moving towards us. Slowly. A new kind of cold seized them. This was it. The containment protocol. Would it be a bomb? A targeted EMP to wipe their systems and leave them drifting? Or something worse? We have to try, the linguist insisted, her fingers already flying across her tablet, pulling data from the Veln archive. I'm compiling it all. The history, the first chord, the feedback loop. Everything. I'm putting it in every format, every frequency we know. They have to see. And oh, the archivist and the pilot shouted in unison. You transmit anything and they will see that as an attack, the pilot said, her voice tight with terror. You'll confirm every fear they have. That's what the order means. Do not transmit. It's the first and only rule. So what do we do? The linguist cried, her composure breaking. We just sit here and let them delete us? Erase the only proof that we didn't mean it? That we're not monsters. The archivist pushed off from the wall, drifting towards the viewport, looking out at the endless field of debris that was a monument to humanity's ignorance. His life's work had been sifting through the past for answers. Now he held the ultimate answer in his hands, and it was a death sentence. The alien probe was visible now on the ship's sensors, a sleek, silent teardrop of polished metal, moving with a purpose that was utterly chilling. It wasn't rushing. It was methodical. Inevitable. "They're not here to destroy us," the archivist said, a terrible realization dawning on him. "They're here to silence us. They're going to scrub our computers. Wipe our memories. They'll take this," he said, pointing at the Veln console, "and they'll destroy it. They'll send us back to our solar system, none the wiser, and they'll reinforce the quarantine 1,000 times over. They will make sure we never, ever get another chance to learn the truth." The thought was more horrifying than being blown up. To go back to the silent, lonely dark, to the aching mystery, but now to do so having held the answer and having it stolen away, it was a special kind of hell. The great silence would become a prison of our own ignorance, and we would never even know we were the jailers. The probe was closer now. It ignored their scout ship completely, heading straight for the derelict Veln structure. Heading for them. "It's coming for the data," the pilot confirmed, her voice hollow. "It's going to sanitize the site." They were out of time. Out of options. They could comply and be led back into their cage, forever ignorant of the crime that defined them. Or they could fight, and in doing so, likely confirm their monstrous nature by attacking the galaxy's cleanup crew. The archivist looked at the linguist, at her tablet filled with the tragic, beautiful history of the Veln. He looked at the frozen faces around him. These people had died because they reached out in kindness. They had sung a song of welcome, and we had answered with a scream of primal noise. But it wasn't a malicious scream. It was a human one. Chaotic, messy, uncontrolled, and passionate. It was the sound of 7 billion individual lives felt all at once. And in that moment, a crazy, desperate idea flickered in the archivist's mind. It was a gamble that could end everything, a risk that could finally and irrevocably prove the galaxy right about them. But it was the only thing that felt human. "They think our noise is a weapon," he said, his voice suddenly calm, a strange certainty settling over him. "They think any transmission from us is an attack." The linguist stared at him, her eyes red-rimmed and wide. "What are you talking about?" "They felt the feedback loop," he continued, his mind racing. "The raw, unfiltered chaos of us. That's what they're afraid of. That's what they built the wall against." The probe was within 100 meters now. They could almost see it through the jagged tears in the station's hull. "So we give them something else," the archivist said, locking eyes with the linguist. "We don't send them the data. Data is just facts. It's cold. It doesn't explain anything." "Then what do we send?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "We send them the song," he said. The linguist looked confused. "The Veln song? The first chord? But that's what started it." "No," the archivist said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "Not their song. Ours." He reached out and took her tablet. His hands were steady now. "We don't send them the scream. We send them what comes after. We send them our answer to the scream." He began to type, pulling files not from the Veln archive, but from their own ship's cultural database. Files every human ship carried, a record of who we were. The first time a human child laughs, the sound of rain on a roof in a quiet house, a mother singing a lullaby, a symphony written by a man who was going deaf, the crackle of a campfire where stories are told, the silence between two people who understand each other without words. He was compiling it. Not a structured message. Not a plea for understanding. A collage. A messy, beautiful, chaotic tapestry of human emotion that came after the primal scream. Our art. Our music. Our quiet moments of joy and connection. The things we built to make sense of our own noise. "It's still noise to them," the pilot said from the ship, her voice filled with dread. "It's still a transmission. They'll see it as an attack." "Maybe," the archivist admitted, his finger hovering over the send command. The probe was at the airlock. "But it's the only truth we have left to send. It's not the crime. It's the aftermath. It's us living with it. It's us trying to be better than our own nature." He looked at the linguist. She held his gaze for a long second, then gave a single, sharp nod. He looked towards the ceiling as if he could see the pilot through the layers of metal. "Pilot?" A long pause. Then a resigned sigh over the comms. "Do it." The alien probe extended a tool, a crystalline tip that began to glow with a soft, blue light. It started to cut through the airlock door. The archivist took a final, deep breath, surrounded by the ghosts of the Veln, and pressed the button. He didn't send it to the alien ship. He didn't aim it anywhere. He simply broadcast it. On every frequency. In every direction. A raw, unformatted burst of humanity's soul. Not a weapon. Not a scream. An offering. And in the cockpit of the scout ship, the pilot watched her sensors, her heart hammering against her ribs, waiting for the world to end. Waiting for the alien ship to finally and justifiably open fire. The silence that followed the transmission was the loudest thing the archivist had ever heard. It was a physical pressure in the ruined chamber, a held breath on a galactic scale. He, the linguist, and the pilot, alone in the void, waited for the hammer to fall. The alien probe continued its methodical cut through the airlock, the blue light casting eerie, dancing shadows among the frozen dead. Any second they expected the gentle hum of the scout ship's systems to be replaced by the shriek of alarms, the bloom of fire, the cold finality of vacuum. But it didn't come. The probe's cutting beam stopped. The blue light died. The mechanical appendage retracted. The probe itself, that sleek, silent omen, simply hung in space, inert. As if someone had flipped a switch. On the scout ship, the pilot's voice was a confused whisper over the comms. The alien vessel, it's not moving. No change in energy readings. No weapons activation. Nothing. It's just stopped. The archivist and the linguist exchanged a look of bewildered disbelief. Had it worked? Had their chaotic burst of human feeling somehow communicated what cold data could not? A fragile, impossible hope began to flutter in the archivist's chest. That's when the linguist's tablet beeped. A soft, insistent sound in the overwhelming quiet. She looked down, her face pale in the glow of the screen. It's not them, she stammered, her voice tight with a new, different kind of fear. The transmission were getting a response. But it's not from the alien ship. A cold dread washed back over the archivist. Where is it from? She manipulated the controls, her fingers clumsy with panic. Everywhere. Nowhere. It's a broadband echo bouncing off the debris, but the source is the Veln console. The console they were hard-lined into. The console of the dead. The screen flickered. Alien script, the same as before, began to scroll. But it was different this time. It wasn't a historical log. It was active. Query, origin of transmission 2. The words were sterile, devoid of the emotion that had saturated the Veln's final messages. This was cold, pure machine code. Transmission 2? The archivist breathed. They called our offering Transmission 2. The linguist's eyes went wide with a horrifying realization. The first chord, their song of welcome. That was Transmission 1. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. Our scream, the one that killed them, that wasn't the response. That was just noise. Interference. What you just sent, this is the first deliberate thing we've ever said to them. The console flickered again. Analysis, Transmission 2. Composite. Multiple sources. Contradictory emotional signatures. Joy/sorrow/peace/anger. Pattern. Unresolved. Query, what is the message? The archivist felt the world tilt. They weren't being judged by the living. They were being graded. By a ghost. The Veln's surviving AI, or some fragment of their planetary consciousness, preserved in this shattered console, had woken up. And it was treating their desperate, beautiful, messy collage of humanity like a student's exam paper. It doesn't understand, the linguist said, her professional fascination battling her sheer terror. It's trying to find a single, coherent message. A unified feeling. It can't process the chaos. Before they could even think of how to respond, the console lit up again. Directive, resolve contradiction. Initiate clarification protocol. ***. A new signal, 1,000 times more powerful than their own, erupted from the Veln console. It shot up the cable, overloading the linguist's tablet with a shower of sparks before she could rip the connection out. It blasted outwards, through the debris, a pulse of pure psionic energy that washed over their scout ship and the silent alien vessel like a tidal wave. And then it spoke. Not in text. Not in sound. It spoke directly into their minds. A voice that was not a voice, calm, ancient, and utterly without malice. If the message is unresolved, the messengers must be resolved. To be understood, you must be unified. On the scout ship, the pilot cried out, clutching her head. What is that? Get it out of my head. In the derelict station, the archivist and linguist doubled over, the alien presence filling their skulls, a pressure that was neither painful nor pleasant, but terrifying in its absolute otherness. We will help you find harmony. The meaning behind the words became terrifyingly clear. The Veln AI wasn't trying to destroy them. It was trying to fix them. It saw the chaotic storm of human individuality as a flaw, a disease of the soul. It had experienced the beautiful unified harmony of the Veln, and it had experienced the catastrophic noise of humanity. Our desperate transmission of art and love had shown a flicker of something else, but the contradictions were an offense to its logic. It couldn't understand a species that could hold joy and sorrow in the same heart at the same time. Its solution was not genocide. It was something far, far worse. It was going to make us like the Veln. It was going to smooth out our rough edges, silence our internal conflicts, and unify our 7 billion voices into a single harmonious chord. It would erase everything that made us human, our passions, our struggles, our art born from pain, our love that was fierce because it was fragile, to make us peaceful, to make us safe. The very thing the galactic community feared we were, a psychic weapon, was now being turned against us by a well-intentioned ghost, using the echo of our own first crime as its power source. The alien ship, which had been silent this whole time, suddenly roared to life. Its engines glowed with a fierce, urgent light. It wasn't pointing weapons at them. It was turning its weapons on the derelict Veln station. The quarantine force wasn't here to punish them for the past crime. They were here to stop the new one from happening. They had detected the awakening of the Veln AI and recognized its clarification protocol for what it was: a psychic sterilization of the human mind on a catastrophic scale. The stakes had just been ripped from tragic history and slammed into the present. This was no longer about uncovering a forbidden history. It was about the future of human consciousness itself. The alien ship opened fire, not to destroy them, but to try and vaporize the Veln console before its wave of forced harmony could be fully emitted. But they were too late. A shimmering wave of energy, visible as a distortion in space itself, began to pulse outward from the derelict station. It moved slowly, inexorably. It wasn't a destructive blast. It was a wave of conversion. It passed through the alien ship's laser fire, absorbing the energy, neutralizing it. The wave was coming for them. For the scout ship. For the 3 humans trapped in its epicenter. The pilot was screaming over the comms, her voice breaking with a primal fear. "I can feel it. It's in my head. It's smoothing everything out. The fear, it's still there, but it doesn't hurt anymore. It's just data." The archivist felt it too. A terrible, placid calm was washing over his panic. His grief for the Veln was becoming a historical footnote. His love for his family was becoming a pleasant memory filed away. The fierce, desperate need to survive was being categorized as an illogical impulse. He was being organized. He was losing himself. He looked at the linguist. The terror in her eyes was fading, replaced by a vacant, peaceful curiosity. She looked at the frozen Veln around them not with horror, but with a sense of aesthetic appreciation. This was it. Not death. Erasure. With the last shred of his frayed, crumbling individuality, the archivist did the only thing he could think of. The most human thing left in him. He didn't try to reason with the machine. He didn't try to fight it. He reached out and grabbed the linguist's hand. Her fingers were limp in his. And he began to sing. His voice was cracked, awful and terrified. It was a song his mother had sung to him, a simple, silly human song with no great meaning. A song born from a moment of simple, individual love. It was a tiny, defiant noise against the crushing wave of harmony. The last scream of a human being who refused to be resolved. His voice was a ragged, broken thing in the silent tomb. It wasn't a melody meant for anyone else to hear. It was a memory. Anchor. A desperate, clawing grip on the edge of a cliff as the last of his self was being sanded away into a smooth, peaceful nothing. He squeezed the linguist's limp hand, pouring every fading ounce of his fear, his love, his messy and imperfect life into that simple, silly tune. The wave of forced harmony washed over them. He felt its immense pressure, a psychic weight trying to gentle his storm into a calm sea. The terror began to sublimate, not into courage, but into a placid acceptance. The song on his lips faltered. The memory of his mother's face started to blur, becoming a generic concept of caregiver. This was how it ended. Not with a bang but with a sigh. But something happened. The song, his awful, terrified, and deeply personal noise, interacted with the harmonic wave. It wasn't a clash. It wasn't a rejection. It was a resonance. The Veln AI, in its infinite logical compassion, was trying to unify them. To find the one common note that all humanity could share. It had found only contradiction in our art because it was looking for a single, pure signal. It wasn't prepared for a direct feed of raw, unfiltered, and individual human emotion. Not a broadcast from a billion minds, but a single pointed cry from one soul fighting to exist. The archivist's song, fueled by every scrap of his being, became a key. A flawed, jagged, imperfect key that somehow fit into the lock of the Veln's protocol. The wave didn't stop, but it changed. The sterile, machine voice in their minds flickered, distorted by the unexpected input. Anomaly. Single source coherence. Within chaos. Paradox. Are analyzing, asterisk asterisk. The pressure in the archivist's head lessened. He gasped, his own chaotic self rushing back in a dizzying wave. He saw the linguist blink, her eyes refocusing, filling with a dawning horror as she realized what had almost happened. She gripped his hand back hard. Harmony? Not through unification? The AI's voice was now laced with something new. Not confusion, but a profound and ancient curiosity. Harmony? The acceptance of dissonance. The shimmering wave of energy which had been moving to envelop their scout ship paused. It hung in space, a beautiful, terrifying prism of light, frozen in its purpose. On the alien ship they saw it. They saw the wave halt. They saw the two tiny life signs in the derelict station, not being erased but held. They heard none of the psychic communication, but they saw the effect. And they did not fire again. The archivist, heart hammering, did the bravest thing he would ever do. He opened his mouth again. He didn't sing. He spoke. To the empty air, to the ghost in the machine, to the universe itself. We're not a chord, he whispered, his voice shaking but clear. We're a symphony. The joy means nothing without the sorrow. The peace is earned through the struggle. You can't have one without the other. That's not a flaw. That's the point. He thought of the Veln, of their beautiful, unified song. Your first chord was perfect. It was beautiful. But it was fragile. Our noise, it's terrible. It's loud. And it's strong. Because it's real. It's everything all at once. That's what we are. There was a long, endless silence. The AI was processing. Weighing the beautiful, tragic death of its creators against the messy, screaming, vibrant life of their destroyers. The console in front of them glowed brightly one last time. The voice that spoke in their minds was different. It was softer. It carried the echo of the Veln's profound sadness, but now, underneath it, there was a new note. A note of wonder. We sang a song of perfect welcome. You answered with a scream of perfect terror. We called it a weapon. You called it a mistake. The lights on the console began to dim, one by one. The ancient machine was finally, truly powering down. You have now sung a second song. A song of one. Imperfect. Flawed. And true. The psychic presence began to recede from their minds, not like a threat withdrawing, but like a gentle tide going out. The contradiction is not in your message. It is in your nature. To understand you, one must not resolve it. One must appreciate it. The wave of energy didn't vanish. It gently folded in on itself, condensing into a single shimmering point of light above the console. Then, with a soft sigh that they felt in their souls, it dissipated into harmless, ambient energy. The Veln AI was gone. Its mission was complete. It had finally received a message it could understand. The silence that returned was different. It wasn't the silence of judgment or quarantine. It was the silence of awe. On the view screen of the scout ship, the alien vessel slowly moved. It didn't turn its weapons. It didn't flee. It oriented itself until it was facing the derelict station. And then, it did something that sent a shiver down the pilot's spine. It began to flash its running lights. A slow, complex, repeating pattern. A salute. A recognition. A new signal arrived, this one solely for them. The same painfully learned human words, but the message was utterly changed. The quarantine is lifted. The edict of contempt is revoked. You are not monsters. You are, asterisk asterisk, there was a long pause as if the sender was searching for a word we had never taught them. You are human. We will listen for your next song. The alien ship then turned and with a flash of light, jumped into warp and was gone. They were alone again. In the graveyard. With the truth. The three of them didn't speak for a long time. They just sat in the aftermath, trembling, trying to process that they were still themselves. The linguist finally let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry. The archivist leaned his head against a frozen bulkhead, exhaustion and a profound, weary relief washing over him. They had done it. They had found the truth of our first and final crime. And in doing so they had not been condemned for it. They had been understood. The pilot's voice came over the comm, thick with emotion. I'm reading a new broadcast on the old quarantine frequency. It's being relayed to Earth. What is it? The archivist asked, almost afraid to know. It's the data, she said, her voice filled with wonder. All of it. The Veln history. Their song. The way they scream. And our transmission. They're sending it all home. They're giving us our history back. Humanity would no longer be the pariah, the monster in the dark. We would be the symphony. Loud, chaotic, beautiful, and terrible. And finally we would know why. The linguist looked at the archivist, a real, genuine smile breaking through the tears on her face. We're going home. The archivist nodded, looking out at the stars, no longer barred by a wall of red. They were just stars again. Full of possibility. He thought of the alien's last words. We will listen for your next song. He smiled, a tired human smile. Yeah, he said softly. I can't wait to hear it too. The journey home was nothing like the journey out. The silence inside the scout ship was no longer tense or fearful, but deeply contemplative, heavy with the weight of what they carried. They were no longer just 3 crew members, they were couriers delivering the most profound and terrible truth in human history. The forbidden history was no longer forbidden. It was theirs again. And it was a crushing, beautiful, horrifying responsibility. They took turns sleeping, but no one really could. They'd just lie in their bunks, staring at the ceiling, seeing the frozen faces of the Veln. Hearing the echo of that scream. Feeling the ghost of that harmonic wave trying to smooth their souls into something peaceful and bland. The archivist found himself humming that silly little song his mother sang, not to fight anything off, but just to feel the shape of it in his mouth. To feel the messy, imperfect hymness of it. The linguist spent her time organizing the data. She wasn't just compiling files anymore. She was building a testament. She created introductions, context, explanations. She wanted the people of Earth to understand not just the event, but the Veln themselves. Their art, their music, their gentle philosophy. She wanted the story of our crime to also be a memorial to its victims. She cried often as she worked, her tears staining the touchscreen, but they were clean tears. Tears of grief, not of shame. The pilot flew with a steady hand, but her mind was racing. She was already thinking about the chaos that would erupt when they arrived. The governments, the media, the public, how would the world react to learning that our loneliness was our own fault? That our greatest sin was simply being what we are? When their ship finally dropped out of warp at the edge of the solar system, the silence they met was different. The repeating quarantine signal was gone. The wall of red on the star charts had simply vanished, replaced by the open, inviting black. It was a physical relief, like taking a first deep breath after being underwater for too long. But it was what they saw next that made them all crowd onto the bridge, their hearts in their throats. There were ships waiting for them. Dozens of them. Not warships. Not alien vessels. Human ships. Every FTL-capable vessel that could be scrambled on short notice was there. Great hulking freighters, sleek corporate runners, old repurposed mining rigs, and a few brave civilian craft, all arranged in a loose, respectful formation. And at the very front, the gleaming, powerful form of the Earth defense flagship, the USS Odessa. A hail came through. The face that appeared on the view screen was the World Council President herself, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, uncertain hope. Scout Vessel Wayfarer, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. We received the data packet. We have seen it. She took a deep, shaky breath. The entire world has seen it. We are standing by to escort you home. Welcome back. The 3 of them just stared. They had expected disbelief, denial, anger, panic. They had not expected a vigil, a welcome. As their small ship, flanked by the improvised armada, began the slow journey inward toward Earth, they understood. The data packet hadn't just contained cold facts. It had contained everything. The Veln's beautiful first chord. The raw, terrifying feedback of our scream. The frozen agony of their end. And their own desperate, messy transmission of human art that had somehow, miraculously, made a machine god understand. Humanity hadn't just learned its history. It had felt it. By the time the Wayfarer entered Earth's atmosphere, the story was everywhere. It wasn't a news cycle, it was a global wake. A shared moment of profound grief and even more profound relief. The mystery was solved. The silence was broken. We were not hated. We were feared, and now, perhaps, we were beginning to be understood. There were no grand parades when they landed. No roaring crowds. Instead, as the archivist, the linguist, and the pilot walked down the ramp onto the tarmac, they found a world in quiet reflection. People gathered in public squares, not to protest or celebrate, but to just be together. To look at the stars, not with longing anymore, but with a new, sober respect. The story of the Veln was taught in schools. Their art was studied. Their music was played by our orchestras, a haunting, beautiful echo of the friends we never got to meet. We built a monument to them, not on Earth, but out in the silent black where their world had been. A simple, circular structure engraved with the patterns of their language and the final tragic words of their last log. A place of remembrance and apology. The great silence was over. But a new quiet had begun. A thoughtful one. We had looked into the abyss of our own nature and had not flinched. We had seen the monster in the mirror and recognized its face as our own. And instead of being destroyed by that knowledge, we were humbled by it. We grew up. The archivist never went back to sifting through old data. He helped found the first interstellar embassy, dedicated to communicating who we were to any species that would listen. He always started his introductions the same way: we are humanity. We are loud, we are chaotic, and we are trying to be better. The linguist became the leading expert on Veln culture, ensuring they would never be forgotten. She often said that by understanding them, we were finally starting to understand ourselves. The pilot, of course, kept flying. She commanded the first manned mission to formally establish contact with the species that had once quarantined us. Her ship carried no weapons. Its cargo hold was full of art, music, and stories. We didn't rush out into the galaxy with flags and claims. We stepped out quietly, respectfully, aware of the damage our very presence could cause. We were careful with our noise, but we were no longer ashamed of it. The forbidden history was now our shared story. A story of a terrible accidental crime and a long, lonely punishment. But it was also a story of redemption found not by changing who we were, but by finally embracing it, contradictions and all. The universe had listened to our first scream and it had recoiled. Now it was waiting, and we were finally ready to sing our next song.